realizing that the people that you lead are fundamentally good people. I spent almost 40 years in the Army, and I can tell you that, at least in my judgment, never did I have a soldier, regardless of rank, who woke up in the morning and said, "Boy, I'm really looking forward to screwing up today."
Yes, sir.
I mean, that just doesn't happen. I mean, people who are a part of an organization that has a purpose.
Welcome to the Science of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you become a better leader. Here, you'll gain valuable knowledge, hear inspiring stories, and learn the scientific principles that promote exceptional leadership. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to becoming a better leader. Today, I'm looking forward to learning from General Scott Wallace as we talk about our need to trust the people we lead. General Wallace is a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point and holds 3 master's degrees. During the Vietnam War, he served as an armor officer, and from 2001 to 2003, he was the commanding general of the Army's 5th Corps, which included the 2003 invasion of Iraq. In 2005, he became the commanding general of the U.S. Army's Training and Doctrine Command. His numerous medals include the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, Legion of Merit, and Bronze Star. Since retiring from the Army, he has served on the board of directors of Oshkosh Corporation and CACI International. General, welcome to the Science of Leadership, and thanks for being here, and thank you for your service to our nation.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Delighted to join you this morning.
Well, General, when we talked before, one of your 3 most important leadership lessons was trust your subordinates. You shared an example of that in a story about the Thunder Runs. Can you set the stage and share that story with us? Because it really leads wonderfully into today's topic.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. As you mentioned, I was the commander of 5th Corps in 2003, and I had the honor of being the Army's senior ground force commander during the invasion of Iraq. As people might recall, we attacked into Iraq in late March and moved pretty quickly up to the point where we were outside the city of Baghdad. And the base plan was to isolate the city and then attack into it and try to take down the defenders and subsequently topple the regime of Saddam Hussein. We got to Baghdad and got set in locations. I had 1 brigade south, 1 brigade to the west, and 1 brigade to the north. And the Marine Corps, under the command of General Jim Mattis, was closing in from the east. So we had Baghdad pretty well isolated. What we didn't have is much information about how the Iraqis were defending Baghdad, or with what units or with what equipment. That, in spite of our best efforts to collect intel. The commander of the 3rd Infantry Division, a great soldier by the name of Buff Blount, Major General, came to me with a plan to try to gain that information, and basically his idea was to attack into Baghdad and see what the heck the enemy did about it, and in the process collecting information about how the enemy was defending. Let me just paint you a picture of the road network into Baghdad. And it was basically, there was a main highway that led up to kind of the center of the city, and it led to a road overpass, which was essentially a T intersection. If you drove up this highway and turned to the west, it led to Baghdad International Airport, which we had already seized and had it under our control. If you turned to the west, you went to downtown Baghdad, the presidential palace complex, and that sort of thing. So Buff's plan, which I approved, was to attack into the Baghdad toward that T intersection, take a left and head out the highway that led to the airfield, which meant we went from a secure location that we owned to another secure location that we owned at the airport. And we did that on the 5th of April. It was, subsequently called the Thunder Run. I guess that's, owing back to the some of our experience in Vietnam, but that's neither here nor there. The attack occurred on the 5th of April with a reinforced battalion of the 3rd Infantry Division. They made heavy contact at several intersections on the way up to that T intersection that I described, and then on the way out to the airport to the west. Relatively little contact. And while that action was occurring, we had a UAV, a drone, flying overhead trying to capture what the enemy's reaction was to the attack. And we observed that as the column passed through these key intersections, the Iraqis tried to put some obstacles in the roadway under the assumption, I assumed, that we were going to back out the same direction we came. And of course we didn't. But that became relatively useful information. The following day, on the 6th of April, we kind of collected our thoughts, primarily in the 3rd ID, about what tactic we might use in future attacks into Baghdad, and determined that what we would do was we would attack to that T intersection and then back out the same direction that we came, fully recognizing we might have to breach enemy obstacles on the way out. And it also became clear to us that holding and maintaining control of those key intersections was key to a successful attack, because in so doing, we could get our logistics in and out and that sort of thing. So on the 7th of April, now General retired and formerly Colonel Dave Perkins, who was the commander of the 2nd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division, he and his boys attacked into Baghdad on the 7th. They got to that T intersection, and rather than backing out, they took a right and headed down into downtown Baghdad. And I don't know if it was by accident, by design, or just good luck, but they were able to get into downtown Baghdad, seize the grounds around the presidential palace, and through some really heroic actions by some of his subordinate leaders and some pretty violent fighting, was able to maintain control of those key intersections that I described earlier. So there we were. We had forces to the north of Baghdad, forces to the west of Baghdad, forces to the south of Baghdad, the Marines closing in from the east, and we had a pretty firm foothold in downtown Baghdad, specifically the presidential palace. At that point, the question became, do we stay or not? And my technique as the senior commander was to listen to what was going on the main radio nets of my subordinate commands, in this case, the 3rd Infantry Division. And I can tell you how long it took. It seems like an eternity. But the discussions that, and I didn't participate in the discussions, I was just listening. And
eavesdropping.
Yeah, that's exactly what we call it. And so through eavesdropping on their nets, I heard General Blount and Lloyd Austin, who was he was the assistant division commander of the 3ID, and Dave Perkins, and there was this dialogue going on, or trialogue, I guess you would call it, about whether we should stay or not. And frankly, my concern was not whether we had the combat power to stay, but was more associated with logistics. Could we get fuel and ammunition in, and could we get our casualties out? And that discussion went on for the better part of an afternoon as Dave Perkins and his guys consolidated their positions. And I can remember distinctly two separate things. One was Dave talked to General Blount and said, look, my positions here and the fields of fire that I have are actually better than the ones I had in the assembly area when I left the objective south of Baghdad. He said, so it's a better place from which to defend. And the second thing that I remember distinctly was that Dave, in order to conserve fuel, ordered his guys to turn off the engines on their tanks while this discussion was going on. So ultimately, this thing went on, and quite frankly, the discussion and the questions and the trialogue that was going on the same questions were being asked and solutions developed. The same questions being asked are the ones that I would have asked had I been part of the discussion. So about mid-afternoon, maybe late afternoon, General Blunt gave me a call on my command net, and he said, "Hey, boss, we've checked things out, and I recommend we stay." And having been part of the discussion, unbeknownst to Buff Blunt, I said, "Okay, Roger, we'll stay. Have a good fight." From that point on, the defenses of Baghdad seemed to at least dissipate and eventually crumble to the point that we had full control over the city.
There's so much there. It's hard to know which way to go with questions. One thing, I mean, it's a huge leadership lesson, this idea of trust those that we're leading and the necessity for that. And as I listen to you talk about this story, it's striking to me that potentially there was this undercurrent there right at the end that what if you hadn't have allowed that to happen? What if you hadn't have trusted? What if you had said, no, do something else? Potentially that could have changed the outcome with regard to taking downtown and securing it and so forth. So I think that's a tremendous leadership lesson. I'd like to say that, micromanagement isn't leadership. And so this ability to pick good people, know that they're well trained to do what they can do, and let them do that. So the question I think that I'm really curious about when you look back is, where did that ability come from? Or from whom did it come? But where did you learn that and develop that ability to trust those people that you lead?
Beats the hell out of me. It's I guess a lifetime of experience. I spent almost 40 years in the Army. Well, let me start out. I think the foundation of all of it is realizing that the people that you lead are fundamentally good people. I spent almost 40 years in the Army, and I can tell you that, at least in my judgment, never did I have a soldier, regardless of rank, who woke up in the morning and said, "Boy, I'm really looking forward to screwing up today."
Yes, sir.
I mean, that just doesn't happen. I mean, people who are a part of an organization that has a purpose, they fundamentally buy into that organization, and it doesn't make any difference if they've been there for a week or 10 years. They're part of that organization, and you want to see it succeed. So you have to accept the fact that the people that you're leading are fundamentally good people, and they're moving toward the same goal that you're moving toward. And if they're not that kind of people, then you have an obligation as a leader to get rid of them.
Sure.
The second thing I would offer is, in my judgment, tough, realistic training is a glue that binds organizations together, because you have a shared experience and you have a shared context, both leader and led. And that training leads to the development of teamwork. And that teamwork leads to a culture of trust in the organization. So, in really simple sophomoric terms, training leads to teamwork, leads to trust, and trust becomes the opportunity to let go of the reins a little bit and let your subordinates do that which you expect them to do and know that they will do. The Army has a thing that they call mission command. It's written about in all the Army literature and leadership doctrine and whatnot. And mission command essentially is a senior commander ensures that his subordinates understand what their mission is, what his intent for accomplishing that mission, what his vision is, and then allows his subordinates to solve that problem, to execute that mission successfully in any way they see fit. And if you buy into mission command, if you buy into that training, teamwork, trust equation, if you will, then trusting in your subordinates becomes not only useful, it becomes almost second nature.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't said that doesn't make it easy. In fact, I would submit that trusting your subordinates is a hell of a lot harder than not trusting them. Because you as a leader have to invest time and energy in developing them to the extent you can trust them.
Mm-hmm.
And you as a leader have to develop techniques to ensure that your intent is well understood all through the organization. And that requires going out and touching people and talking to them and being very repetitive about what your vision is and all that sort of stuff. Because you got to realize that the people you lead and keep changing every once in a while, which causes you to have to reestablish that link.
You said a lot of things there that are really important and valuable, and then I want to kind of drill into a bit this idea of practice. You talked about really, in a sense, training. So, and I'm going to say practice. And obviously, you were over TRADOC, the Army's Training and Doctrine Command, for those listening. And so you have that mindset, that training mindset, how important that is. I think that as I look out across the landscape, and most of the landscape, other than my military experience, is within the domain of medicine, large medical organizations, and especially academic medical organizations. But the thing that I would say that strikes me that is far superior with regard to the military is that there is organized training and I've written about this in the medical literature, in that in the military, you are always training until the time you retire. There's always more you can learn. There's always more that you can get better at doing. And especially in medicine, but also in other domains, business and tech and so forth, that isn't the case. There isn't that structured continual training. It's not a continued process improvement mentality. I think that's really to the detriment of these organizations. Basically, it seems like the tendency is to try to identify very capable people, assume that the training they've gotten up to this point has been adequate, hire them into a given role, and release them to do whatever task it is that they're supposed to be doing or leading, and then wonder why they don't excel in that. One area where I would say in medicine that we have continued formalized training is in the delivery of care in a cardiac arrest situation. So when a patient has an arrest event, let's say their heart stops, they drop dead, whatever it may be. With regard to those in the medical field, we have to have every 2 years, we have to get certified that we know how to resuscitate people through certain algorithms and so forth. And in that, you're working as a team. Everybody's got an assigned role. You know what your role is. You know what you're supposed to be doing. Here's how the algorithm works. And people do that over and over and over. Every 2 years, even though I've done this training, golly, at least 11 times, probably more like 14, but anyway, over and over. And so everybody in medicine knows their role. They know what they're supposed to be doing. We can trust each other that, yes, this person knows what to do in this situation and so forth. But it's not necessarily the same when it comes to any other kind of endeavor within the organization. Do we know what we're doing? Yes. But could we be better? Absolutely. And I don't think that we have systems in place to continue to develop. And so as I think about from the perspective of listeners, I would say, I suspect that there are people out there saying, yeah, it'd be great to have the training to build the teamwork, but we just don't. And so I wonder, what would your response to that be?
Well, very simplistically, I would say if you're the leader, you have the obligation to create conditions to train the people that work for you. If you're a team leader, you can carve out a couple minutes a week. If you're a senior executive, you can put programs into place that cause that stuff to happen and institutionalize those programs so they aren't episodic and that they don't die with the departure of the senior executive or the leader. I think somebody who buys into the idea of the importance of training can create conditions that allow the training to occur. But you're also very, very correct in saying at least the Army has established and invested in a very rigorous training regimen. I spent 6 years of my career at the Army's National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California. And that is a location which is dedicated to training Army brigades. And those brigades rotate through. I had the good fortune of being one of the senior trainers at the National Training Center, and the philosophy is really, really easy. I mean, it's really easy to understand. It's not easy to execute because it's complex putting things together. But we create a condition where a maneuver unit has to go up against a very well-trained opposing force. And that opposing force can replicate any number of enemies, be they, you can conjure up whatever enemy we're dealing with on, the enemy du jour. But the important part of the training at the training center is not the exercise itself. It's the pause that occurs after the event, where you gather all the leaders of the organization together to try to figure out what happened. And the formula is pretty simple. It's what happened, and get all these leaders together, because if you're the brigade commander, you have one view of what happened. If you're a platoon leader, you have a totally different view of what happened.
Sure.
And when you put together all these different views with the assistance of some automation and technology that allows you to track individual vehicles and gunshots and all that sort of stuff, then you can put together a pretty reliable picture of ground truth, what happened. So let's accept what happened. That's what happened to us. Now, why did that happen? Why did 1st Platoon go right instead of left? And if they'd gone right, or if they'd gone left, would that have changed the outcome? And so you get into a very sometimes intense professional discussion of why things happen. And once you've established what happens, puts everybody on a common footing, understanding what happened and what the outcome of the fight was. Why it happened is this dialogue among leaders, and each of them, in a perfect world at least, shares their experience of that particular episode. And then the really important thing is, given what happened and why it happened, what are we going to do to fix the things that need fixing the next time we have an opportunity to do one of these things? That after action review typically lasts about 2 hours. It's recorded. It's provided to the unit when they leave the training center so they can review it when they get back to home station. And it becomes a very powerful learning tool. And over time, at least in the Army, it has become the standard by which we review training. I can tell you, as a senior trainer at the National Training Center, I used to sit up on a hill and watch stuff happen, and I think, damn, that's really hard, really, really hard stuff. And I'm not sure I could do any better than the guy I'm watching. But I have the advantage of instrumentation that allows me to look at it and develop the what happened and try to lead, ask leading questions of the assembled leaders during the after action review of particular aspects of the fight that I thought were pivotal to the outcome.
But it's this value of inculcated philosophy of continued training and established systems to make sure that that happens. And to get back to, what we sort of started with on that question is, it's the responsibility of the leader of the organization to create that framework, to create that ethos of continual development. As you were talking, I was thinking about Edward W. Deming and his work that led to Toyota's approach to quality, and how Kaizen and the whole idea of lean and Six Sigma and all these things derive from that kind of approach where it's continual improvement. There's always more to learn and do and get better at. And so I think that fits exactly with what you're saying. And it fits with organizations outside the military, those people that are listening who are wondering how to improve the processes where they work, in their organization, how they become better, how do they lead better. It's just, as you said, it's about creating this expectation, this philosophy that we're going to be training. And it doesn't have to be, you said right at the beginning of that, it doesn't have to be a huge thing. It can be a couple of minutes here, a couple of minutes there. Hey, just sort of, what if we call it micro mentoring or micro teaching, right? It's just these short bursts that are really important. It's amazing what you can learn from a fortune cookie, right? Or some aphorism. It's learning to put a particular idea in a context, perhaps, and how much difference that can make in somebody's ability to function within their job and to do better. So training isn't necessarily this idea of extended weeks, months of developmental courses and things. It can be broken up in other ways. So I think that's all very valuable, what you just covered.
One other thing I would add, which I think is extraordinarily important, is the idea, particularly here in training, that if a subordinate makes a mistake, he doesn't get destroyed. You as a leader have a responsibility, in my judgment, to underwrite the mistakes of your subordinates, if they were honest mistakes and if they were correctable.
Yeah, and that gets into this idea of, which goes to trust also, that if you ask, direct, whatever, someone to undertake something and they do that in good faith and it doesn't work, you have to be a person of enough character to say, I told them to do that. That's on me. They're not at fault. And so many times people just shrink away from that.
Yeah, once upon a time in some leadership course somewhere in my deep dark past, they issued this buff-colored pamphlet, and I don't remember what the hell the title was. I don't even remember where it came from, but I do remember one particular excerpt, and it went something like this: if there's something screwed up in your organization, start looking for solutions in ever-increasing concentric circles around your own desk.
Right.
And it goes back to my comment about, I never met a soldier who woke up in the morning wanting to screw something up and looking forward to it. Because my experience is if something gets screwed up, if a soldier makes a mistake, it's usually the fault of some leader who didn't provide him proper guidance, proper direction, proper supervision, proper leadership.
You're touching on communication, which is in the study of you and the other 54 stars that I interviewed and studied. That's the fourth C. So the first is character, competence, caring, and communication. And so while we're hitting on, to some degree, the character component, ownership, integrity, honor, those sorts of things we're talking about today, we haven't necessarily named them, but that's in this mix. But also competence, the ability to trust people, the ability to train people, the ability to lead them functionally, and then communication, actually conveying to them what is expected of them and what they need to be doing. So those are all vital. I want to mix things up on you here a bit, okay? So we just talked about, you told the story about the thunder runs, and we were talking about this trusting the people that we lead and how important that is. But again, I wanted to mix things up because when we talked last, I asked you for a leadership lesson you learned the hard way, and your answer really struck me as particularly interesting. And it was, sometimes there are things that are so important that the leader personally has to be involved in the decision. And so can you share the story behind that idea and then put it in the context with that first lesson so our listeners can reconcile them?
Yeah, I could try. It's not an episode I'm particularly proud of.
Yes, sir.
We, still in the context of the attack into Iraq and toward Baghdad, we regarded the Medina division of the Republican Guards as the best trained, best equipped organization that we would likely to be facing. And we formulated this notion that if we could destroy the Medina division, or at least do it irreparable damage, then that would make things, one, easier, and secondly, it would directly affect the morale and the cohesion of the Republican Guard as we move toward Baghdad. And one of the techniques that we were to employ to destroy the Medina division was using our attack helicopters, our Apaches, to attack deep beyond the forward line of troops into the Medina division and destroy what we could. I think it was the 23rd of May. It's the day I started smoking again. We conducted a deep attack, and it was a disaster. I think we launched, 23, 25, 28 Apache helicopters. Every one of them came back to the assembly area with a bullet hole in them. One Apache was shot down. Two of my pilots, the Apache pilots, were captured by the Iraqis and were subsequently liberated by a Marine forced recon unit that was moving from north from the Baghdad area up to Tikrit. We didn't accomplish the mission. We damaged a bunch of aircraft. Our pilots were very much not only disappointed but dejected by their failure to accomplish what we had set out to do. And so the next morning, and the deep attack was conducted like around midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning, something like that. So when the sun came up, I went and met with the commanders that were involved in the attack. And we did an after-action review. Tried to figure out what happened, why it happened, and what we were going to do the next time. And as it turned out, there was a whole litany of mistakes that were made that led to the decision to execute the attack. My failure as a commander was that I wasn't personally involved in that decision. I had delegated the authority for the go, no-go decision to my chief of staff, a one-star, very capable guy, great artilleryman, a guy in whom I had great trust and confidence. But as we peeled back the onion on what had happened, it became obvious that there were some pieces to the equation that just didn't add up. And in retrospect, my judgment was that I probably, if this attack was as important as I just described at the beginning, then I probably should have personally been involved in the go, no-go decision rather than delegating that authority. Would I have made a different decision? I can't tell you because I did, in retrospect, I would have been brilliant. Now, I'm a much better Corps commander today than I was 20 years ago because I've forgotten all the bad things I did and I remember all the good things, I reckon. But anyway, my judgment over the years has come to be that I personally should have been involved in that go, no-go decision rather than delegating because it was of such importance to the overall conduct of the fight. As it turned out, it didn't influence the ultimate outcome because we were able to get to Baghdad. We were able to dispose Saddam Hussein and the rest is history. But that is at least my example of trust is important, but every once in a while, if it's extraordinarily important to the organization, if the outcome is that important, then the leader might need to be personally involved in decisions associated with it.
Yes, sir. I think the question that comes to my mind in hearing you share that story again is how, on the front end, as much as possible, how can we know when we must be involved in these decisions versus trusting our subordinates to handle it?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I'm not sure I have a good answer. I think if the circumstance presents itself, you need to ask yourself, is what I am doing more urgent than this other task that is ongoing within my organization that I might ought to be paying attention to? It goes back to my comment earlier, trusting your subordinates is really hard work. It really is. You got to have a sense for what's going on in the organization in order to accommodate that trust. And the only way you can do that is being out and communicating and talking to people and finding out what's going on. You have to be where the action is. You have to listen to people. You have to be a really good listener. And I suspect all of us have worked for leaders who said, here's what we're doing and here's how we're doing it, and accepted no discussion and stuff. But my judgment is you got to be a good leader. You got to be a good listener as well as a good, communications is two-way. And if you don't foster the idea that people can communicate with you, then it becomes a one-way street, which is not communication at all. It's dictatorship, I guess. I don't know.
Broadcasting or whatever it may be. Well, it reminds me of, so in my work, I came across this idea of what's known as the pre-mortem. I don't know if you've ever heard of this concept, but
yeah,
we'll put up an image from my book that shows this. It'll be in the video, and we can also include it in the show notes for those who are just listening to audio. But basically, you have this graph where you have on the x-axis the severity of impact of a given event. And then on the y-axis, you have the likelihood that event will actually happen. And so in the lower left-hand corner, you can see that the impact is low, the likelihood of it is low. So in that situation, you just say, we're not going to give any thought to it or worry about it so much because it's really not going to be a problem. On the top right hand of the graph, there is high, severe impact, high likelihood. And for that, you have to do everything possible to prevent it from occurring. And then in the middle, there's this sort of gray zone, where it's moderate to high risk, it's moderate to high likelihood. In that situation, you mitigate, you do everything that you can to try to decrease either the impact or the likelihood of the event occurring. And so I was thinking about, as you were speaking, I was thinking about that graph and thinking about, in a lot of ways, it's sort of similar. You have to look at, here's this thing that we're going to do, or, process or mission or whatever it may be, task. We're going to do this thing. How important is it that it be accomplished? And what is the likelihood of it being accomplished well without my involvement? So we could change the graph a little bit, and then we look at it. And so that if it's really important that I need to be involved, or that it needs to be accomplished, and it's really likely that it will be accomplished if I'm involved, then that becomes the upper right-hand corner. I need to be involved, and vice versa. So I think that as you were describing that, and I was thinking about in this context of the pre-mortem, really it helped me to generate, and I'll put up I'm going to devise from this conversation, I'm going to devise a new graph actually, and we'll share that. But really a way to think about, do I need to be involved in this? Yes or no? And it'll show this graph. And so I think that may be the greatest thing, at least for me, that may be the greatest idea that I get out of our conversation today. And hopefully it'll be helpful for listeners and so forth.
Well, let me give you a little bit of a postscript to that last story, because it doesn't end there. As I mentioned, the two pilots were liberated by the Marines. There were also 4 or 5 other soldiers with those two pilots. If you recall, early in the invasion, the story of Jessica Lynch and
Yes,
I think it's the 54th Maintenance Detachment. Anyway, there were several soldiers from that organization that were captured at the same time, and the Iraqis had these two pilots and those soldiers all in the same location. And subsequent to, once we got the pilots back and they were liberated and all that stuff, and they debriefed the people, it became clear that one of the pilots was instrumental in controlling the situation amongst the prisoners. And that particular pilot was a graduate of the United States Air Force SERE School, SERE, Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. An extraordinarily important school that virtually all Air Force pilots go through, because they have the possibility of being captured behind enemy lines and all that sort of thing. And we didn't have a SERE school in the Army. We depended on the Air Force, and the slots to get into the school were very, very, very hard to come by. So later in life, when I became the commander of U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command, we built our own SERE school using the Air Force model. And at least when I was a TRADOC commander, the design was that all of our helicopter pilots, before they graduated flight school, would go through SERE training in the eventuality that they became a prisoner of war. And not only that, CW4 Williams, who was one of the pilots that was captured, who had had that SERE training with the Air Force, was placed in charge of developing the curriculum and the first several iterations of that SERE school that we put together at what was then Fort Rucker, Alabama, and what is today Fort Novasol. The moral of that story is, as you move up in leadership, the things that you learn at a lower grade or lower position become opportunities to influence an outcome when you get more senior in your career and in positions where you can really do something about.
It's almost like a meta review, in the sense that you, as a result of that, reviewed more broadly how to improve the Army's capabilities, and then introduce SERE training for the Army. So I think that is extraordinarily valuable and demonstrates kind of a philosophy of never miss an opportunity to learn from a mistaken judgment, perhaps.
Perhaps.
Yes, sir. Well, General Wallace, I want to kind of dive in a little bit just on some of the science behind the concepts that we've been talking about here with regard to trust. And so, when we talk about trust, and we've, in multiple previous episodes of the Science of Leadership, we've hit on this concept of the importance of trust for excellent leadership. And really it's essential, I think, to leadership. So from research, we know that it creates the basis for the relationship through which leadership, which really is influence, can occur. And if we're going to be successful as leaders, the people we're hoping to lead have to trust us. When we look at the science behind that, studies have shown that trust really exists in what I would call a reciprocal state. And this idea actually came out in my analysis of the interviews with all of you 4-stars, this reciprocal state. And that is, when we extend trust to someone else, and as leaders, really, if it's going to work right, we have to be the ones who extend the trust first. And when we do that, they will trust us in return. So that if we want someone to trust us to lead them, we have to first trust them. There are a lot of other positive effects to trust just beyond setting that stage for us to be able to lead. And so when we look at that, as I think about it at least, there's kind of this cascade that happens with trust. First, it really strengthens the relationships and makes people want to stay with us, which is, we say, it increases retention, right? Which retention has been a major problem in the last few years for basically just about every kind of professional domain across our nation. And so trusting people and developing a relationship of trust increases retention. So that's really important. I think something, a takeaway that our listeners can have. This cascade continuing, those stronger relationships that come when we develop trust foster psychological safety for our team members. And so when people feel psychologically safe, they're more collaborative, they're more engaged in their work, they have more innovation because they can think outside the box and not be concerned about failing. And so these are just some of the scientifically demonstrated effects that accrue when we trust those that we lead. But there's more to it, and that is it affects us too. And so when we as leaders trust those we lead, especially in a collaborative and engaged environment, we're more receptive to a range of perspectives, which leads us to better, more effective decision making. And these are just some of the highly valuable positive effects that can come from trusting the people that we lead. I'll include several references in the show notes and the description. But for those listeners, if you're looking to read a great book about this topic, I would recommend you check out The Speed of Trust by Stephen M.R. Covey. Great book. I think you'll enjoy it. So that's a little bit of the science behind this idea.
I think you're right. Stephen Covey's book is very, very interesting. It's not a hard read at all. What he points out fundamentally is that through having trust in your organization, it speeds up decision making, which speeds up outcomes, which also gives you a competitive advantage, which is, be it military or corporate, that's something we're all seeking to achieve.
Yes, sir. That's an idea actually that General Stan McChrystal wrote about in his book Team of Teams, and he's actually going to be on the podcast in the not too distant future. So yes, this idea of speeding up decision making because we trust people who are at the front lines to make the decisions, as opposed to, again, getting back to what I was talking about right at the beginning of the podcast, micromanaging everybody. So, well, you shared a really compelling story regarding trusting your subordinates and the value of that, as well as this perspective that we must also know when we absolutely have to be involved. As you think about trusting your subordinates, can you make this practical for our listeners? That is, again, how do we build that muscle to be able to trust our people?
First of all, you got to trust yourself. You got to trust yourself in terms of your competency and your not your authority, because you get authority with the position you're in, but the responsibility that you have. I think the second thing is something we've already talked about, and that is create an environment where and the venues for repetitive training to create shared experiences between the leader and his subordinates, so that you all have a similar context. The thing that I didn't mention, which I think is equally as important, is through doing that sort of exercise in that I'll call it training. It might be a simple tabletop exercise or something. You as a leader, through observation, figure out who you can trust the most and who needs a little bit extra oversight. And so in execution of an actual problem, you can devote your attention to where you think the the weak points might be in your organization. That's not to say they're bad people and they're doing bad things, but they just don't have the same degree of competence or confidence that others do. So you can direct yourself inside your organization to the pressure points that need your attention. And as I suggested earlier, all of this is really hard work. It's really hard work. Creating trust in an organization is a hell of a lot harder than micromanaging.
Yeah, that's good. So, just to recap those, you got to trust yourself, your ability to do the job, to lead the folks that you're leading. The second thing among that was create opportunities for continued training and improvement among yourself and your team. And the third was look for those people who need to continually improve more perhaps than other people, and try to increase everybody's capabilities so that you can trust them more and they can trust themselves. Really, I think perhaps one of the areas where we fail the most is when somebody that we're leading knows that they are lacking the capability to do something, and we impose on them a false sense of capability when they tell us, hey, I think I might need some support on this. If they have a trusting enough relationship to be able to tell us that, that's a major key. But if somebody comes and says, I don't think that this is that I'm the right person for your job, and we tell them, oh, we believe in you. Yes, you can do it. And they go out and screw it up. That was a major mistake on our part. Bringing in some of my own practice in medicine as a pediatric cardiologist, when I have a patient with congenital heart disease who needs complex cardiac surgery on their heart to get better, to even live, if I talk to a surgeon and the surgeon says, I don't want to do this surgery, I don't know if I'm the right person to do this surgery, the last thing I need to do is to impose on that surgeon, well, I want you to do this surgery. You have to do this surgery, because that's not going to end well for anybody. And so I think it's the same mentality when it comes to people that we're leading. We have to recognize if we get any pushback, maybe they're trying to tell us something.
Yeah. And, you're obligated to listen to them. You're also obligated, if you're worth a shit, to give them the assistance that you think they need, either to make them better the next time the same circumstance occurs, or to assist them in doing what you've assigned them to do from the get-go.
One question that I was thinking about, for those who are addicted to micromanagement, and I think that's pretty common in my experience, but for those who are addicted to micromanagement, do you have any suggestions how they might go about learning to let go of that?
Yeah, get over it.
It's clear, concise. I like it.
I don't know. It's almost a personality trait. You can micromanage if you're a squad leader and there's only 2 or 3 people working for you. But if you want to be the CEO, there's no way in hell that you can micromanage a large organization. If you aspire to be a senior leader of an organization, then you have to get over the tendency to micromanage. And the quicker you do that, in my judgment, the quicker you'll rise up the corporate ladder.
Yeah, I think there's this fear that occurs for a lot of people who are in certain positions of leadership, that if their people fail, then it's a reflection on them. If the thing isn't perfect, it's a reflection on them, and that they're somehow flawed, and without getting into the growth mindset and the fixed mindset, I think that's a fundamental component of it. And
well, it is a reflection on them. How they deal with that failure is also a reflection on them. And my judgment is that how they deal with it is the growth component of the experience.
Yeah. I guess where I was, as in my thinking, was they see it as that means that they're not capable, period. And so the only way to maintain that facade that they're capable is to do everything in their power to control every component that is micromanage, everything, so that it will be successful. And as you pointed out clearly, the more complex and matrixed an organization, the less possibility there is for anybody to do that. So if you're wanting to be a leader at a higher level in an organization, you got to let go of that.
I know, by the way, by trying to do that at a senior level, you're going to be exhausted every day, every night when you go home.
Sure.
Yeah.
If you had unlimited knowledge and unlimited energy, perhaps you could do it. But otherwise, give it up.
Yeah.
Right? Get over it, as you said. Okay. Just before we close out, I wanted to ask, as you think about what we've talked about today regarding trusting your subordinates and so forth, are there other things we should be thinking about? Is there anything else you think it would be good to discuss, or you feel like we've covered it pretty well?
Well, I've tried to share with you my experience in the military, and to the extent that it applies to somebody else's circumstance, then I hope that they'll at least consider it. I can't think of anything else to discuss. I am obviously a believer in trusting the people that work for you, because I think they're fundamentally good people. And if you have a leader have hired the wrong people, then shame on you. You have an obligation to if they just don't get it, you have an obligation to pat them on the butt and send them on their way, and look for somebody else that fits your organizational direction, design, vision, and mission.
Yeah. Three things that people, leaders, that we have to do with regard to having good people. First, we have to hire the right people. Second, if we don't have the right people, we have to train them to become the right people. And third, if we can't train them to become the right people, we have to, as you say, pat them on the rear and let them go on to some other endeavor. So I think those three things are really important. I think that's a great way to end out our conversation. General Wallace, thank you, sir, for being willing to come on the Science of Leadership. I really appreciate it. I think it's been a great discussion.
Thanks, Tom. I enjoyed talking with you. I hope your listeners get some benefit out of all of this.
I'm sure they will. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.